Welcome to State Change. I'm Clay Douglas. Along with my co-host Nikolai Berardi, each week we bring you info you can use to improve your mental and physical states with plant medicine. It's the latest info backed by science.
All right, folks, we're back. So we were talking about time and the time limitation and also the importance for humans to be able to be kind of working with an AI. So this is often called human in the loop. And there have been a lot of great innovations lately around how AI can help doctors to be more efficient. So one of the examples, the famous examples, is around reading X-rays and being able to direct doctors to spend their time much more efficiently. And they're seeing sort of 2 to 3 times improvements, which is really important because, as you mentioned, aging population, more disease states. In the US, where I come from, I mean, there are chronic diseases everywhere. Yeah. There's this whole Make America Healthy Again movement as a response to this. And so I think if we talk about the role that AI can play there, it really is about reducing costs and reducing time, which are sometimes the same thing because the time is expensive of experts. And putting the knowledge, the information, in a useful format for both the patient, for the actions that they can take, and for the health professional. Yeah. And it's a really exciting time because I feel like we're just at the beginning of this. And I think we're going to look back on, 2024 and say, man, we were really making some boneheaded decisions. We really didn't know what we were doing, and like how silly, was our approach. One of the things I want to explore with you a little bit, because I think I was talking with Christina Busmalis, who was one of the people behind IBM's Watson, so one of the first AIs involved with health. And then she was leading the health practice at Google for their cloud solutions for the healthcare industry. And she was kind of opening my eyes to how important the social determinants of health are. And as we talk about the remote patient monitoring, which would be the Oura Ring and the Apple Watch, that's gathering a lot of kind of information. If you think about blue zones, which are being attacked right now, but this idea that we see here in Switzerland often of, I'll be climbing to the peak of some mountain and this 85-year-old guy will just roll right past me. I think, man, here I am at 49, like not even close. I'm huffing and puffing, I'm winded. So I think having all of that information really kind of explodes the current way that things are done, right? It's too much information. You don't know what to do with it in order to calculate the probabilities. And this is what AI does. And there have been incredible breakthroughs recently. I think it was in December. We all know that roughly a 3-day, depending on where you live, a 3-day weather forecast is accurate. And Google released something that had the same accuracy at 3 days out to 15, which of course isn't available to us yet, but they were able to do it going back, I think, 20 years. So I think we're going to be able, as we collect this information, to make much better guesses, right? Narrow the probability, right, of what's happening and really, really guide people. And I think a vision that we share is that someone can kind of pick a point on, let's say, a health map or a psychic map, a mental health map, and say, I want to go there. That's the change that I want to make. I want to be, and actually I'm envious of this woman that you were describing who doesn't feel pain and is always like really enjoying her life. So let's say I want to go there. Maybe I can only go there for a few hours because of the way the endocannabinoid system works. But, I want to go there. What's the chance out of everything that's available to me? And here in Switzerland, we have 50, 60 different flowers on the market. In Germany, I think it's 450. And each one of those rolls through all the time with different batches, right? So it's kind of too much information for anyone to really make an educated decision right now. And that leads to a lot of misses. So one of the people that you and I know, Simone, who's dealing with multiple sclerosis, he invests a lot of time and energy to figure out what's going to work for him, but it's always about a batch because the next batch that rolls in
can be totally different.
Yeah. And, he was telling me in his experience, he'll try 12 different flowers. He'll do sort of a basic sort. Often here in Switzerland, we don't have the terpenes available. So it really is kind of researching online and hoping that genetic is the one that they were talking about. And so it's expensive for him to do. It takes a long time because each one is its own session. Yeah. And then it's not really going to be that reliable for him on the ongoing basis because some of those products may not be available or it's a different batch that's coming in. So that strikes me as a really bad state. I think this is where if we talk like, okay, we're going to look back on the past and be like, what were we doing? Why did we have to spend all that time and money?
And I think it goes even further because when we talk about cannabis now, the state that the whole industry is globally. We know we have recreational markets. Switzerland just had the newest
it's coming.
Like draft of a legalization law. We have Germany who legalized cannabis. But still the way we and patients, but also recreational users use cannabis is kind of primal. So you just go to a shop, say, give me something, maybe the dispensary or the pharmacy or wherever you get it has some information. The whole situation on the black market is anyway totally dark. Nobody knows what you get. And you just try it out and see if you like it. And as you mentioned, I think there is where it starts to get interesting also because the borders between what is purely medical intention and what is a state change in recreational starts to blur. And I think plant medicine in general, everybody has tried plant medicine. It's called tea. The tea is a plant medicine. You make an extract with hot water out of a plant, and it can, many people know it can help with certain conditions. If you take a tea, if you have a bellyache, it can help you with that. But often it's through trial and error. Maybe on the packaging it says, okay, this tea is good for a cold, this tea is good for that. But still it's not very scientific. So it's just a kind of a trial and error. And you're prone to being tricked. So there's a lot of bad actors also in the whole plant medicine space, I think, who try to capture these patients who are kind of fed up with the mainstream medicine, but they sell them really nothing that is evidence-based. So you have the whole spectrum from purely recreational people to fully medical patients. But the goal of them all is the same. They say the medical patient maybe say, hey, I'm in pain. I don't want to have to pain. So that's the state I want to change. The recreational patient the recreational person or consumer maybe says, hey, I'm stressed when I come home. I want to relax. So that's maybe somewhere in the middle because burnout it's a diagnosis. But still, it's not the same as, let's say, the MS patient who has multiple sclerosis and he wants to lose his spasms. So you have the people in the middle. And then, of course, you also have people who say, hey, I'm in a state of just being bored and I want to go party and enjoy myself. But it's always this kind of what state am I in and what do I want to reach? And the way you can do it now is just by trial and error. And if you don't know what's inside, you have no chance to really predict. Maybe after some time you have a dispensary, these growers have the flowers that more or less stay the same over the course of time, but often it's really just a surprise.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we both want to change, to say, hey, why not use the possibility also if we have the API, so if we know the ingredients of the different batches, and we have enough people who are willing to share their experience also. So I think it's also often very social aspect to it. By sharing your own experience, you're helping others who are maybe in the same situation like you and also want to change their state in the same direction that you do. And I think there's a huge potential for that to really help people to stay on track and not having to try 20 different things, making bad experiences, which can happen and but don't have to happen if you really have the targeted approach and know, okay, based on 10,000s of others who tried this is the most probable to give you the effect that you want.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be very exciting, and can't wait for us to start with it. Maybe for people listening, can you explain a little bit more what we are planning with Vervana and what that is?
Yeah. Why don't we take a short break and we'll come back and talk about Vervana. Yeah. We're going to talk a little bit about Vervana, which is a project that Nikolai and many other talented people are working on and have been working on for quite a while. The problem that we want to solve with Vervana is the problem of choosing the right plant medicine with a focus on cannabis in legal markets to achieve your goal, which is a state change. So you start with your goal. What is it that I'm looking to do? Then you can filter with a selection based on the chemical properties, based on the scientific literature, based on other people who are similar to you in terms of gender, weight, goals, a variety of different things. And there's a recommendation system, so it can help you choose and can rank all of the available options in wherever you are to help you choose the right products. Then there's a feedback loop. So you say, okay, I consumed it, this is what happened. I was at a 4 and I went to an 8, or I was at a 4, I went to a 1. And this was helpful or it wasn't. We also have an ability for you to kind of assess quality. So a sommelier or ganjier approach where you can say, okay, I gave it a squeeze test, or if I'm smoking it, was it a white ash? Was it a smooth smoke? All of these different things which are important from the subjective experience of the flower. Measuring the smell, the colors, the trichome density, a variety of different things, and making that a very easy, enjoyable interface. So when you have that experience, like we were talking about Simone earlier, a lot of that information kind of stays with him, which is a shame because he would love to benefit from other people who've had, going out and exploring things, and other people would love to benefit from him. So, so the idea is then to also, if you're working with a health professional, which we always recommend, that you would you can share that in a way that your healthcare professional can take that information and help guide you on the journey that you're on towards reducing a disease or maximizing your health. So there's a lot of use of new tools. This is something that really couldn't be done until recently, and when we talk about GPT 4.5, there are things that we can do with that we couldn't do 2 days ago, or 3 days ago. So it evolves very, very quickly. I'm fortunate to be working with a large number of AI experts in the community here in Switzerland, and I can tell you it's overwhelming. One of the issues that I deal with is insomnia, and if I'm taking in all of this information before 10 p.m., good luck. Or sorry, after 10 p.m., I just can't sleep because I'm so, excited about all the possibilities of everything that we can do. So, but yeah, at the base of it, it's around information about you, information about the products, the scientific literature, and then information from other people that have been aggregated. Everything is private. Everything is de-identified. Here in Switzerland, we're lucky to have the toughest data protection rules in the world. It's called FADP. And we can also have servers that, in fact, you introduced this to me, that are in former bunkers. So, everyone in the world's familiar with Swiss cheese, but a lot of our mountains here are also full of tunnels, and they kind of look like Swiss cheese. So there's an old decommissioned bunker, and servers are in there, and you've got guys outside who are armed guards, and nobody can access the data. And we take it very, very seriously here in Switzerland. And I think part of that comes from the culture. It's a culture that values privacy. This is part of the reason that banking did so well here. And I mean, there are a lot of topics around that, but there was the idea, I think, in the Constitution that, your banking information can't be shared. And if it's shared, it's not the bank that has the problem, it's the banker who did it. And they can go to, and it's the same here with FADP. So if any of the data is shared in the company, I'm the guy who gets
arrested
and put in a different bunker.
Yeah.
So it's really the kind of global standard in security. But if we kind of go back to like my motivations on this, you mentioned a little bit about your family. I'll talk a little bit about mine. I think it's interesting to kind of understand these roots, because the stories that we heard growing up and the people that we interacted with, I think kind of shaped our view of how to be useful in society. And, they were kind of, in some ways, heroes of ours. I have a great aunt, Dr. Charlotte Olivier, who was in Lausanne and was addressing the problem of tuberculosis, which was a big issue about 100 years ago there in Lausanne. And in her kind of discovery process and in trying to treat this and bring tuberculosis under control, she discovered that a big part of the issue was unclean living conditions. And so it was one of the first public health efforts that had been done, and it really led to a dramatic reduction. So I grew up with stories about people kind of thinking differently and trying to kind of work on a problem and successfully over, a long period of time, usually finding a solution that could be helpful. And that was really inspiring for me. And then hearing from you about your grandfather, and maybe you could talk a little bit about your grandfather. I'd love to share that with the audience.
So my grandfather was a psychiatrist, and he also was always someone who went a little bit against the mainstream. So there was this time with Freud, and he was always a Jungian, so from C.G. Jung. And he founded the Jung Institute in Zurich, and he was responsible also for developing new techniques in psychiatry. So one of the things he developed is something that's called psychodrama. And the way it works is because normally when you go to a psychiatrist, you lay on a couch and you talk about your problems, and the psychiatrist listens, asks you a question, and it's kind of a very unilateral way and not very interactive. And for a lot of people, it's very hard also to explain things, how they feel or how it is for them if they just have to talk about their emotions. And he discovered that it worked way better when you combined it with role play. So the way it would work is that you have often a group of patients who know each other, and they go through their problems through role play. So let's say you have a problem with your boss at work, and it makes you burned out and depressed, but you cannot really explain what the problem is. Then you go into a role play, and I would play, for example, you, and you would play your boss.
Okay.
And then I would come in to you, and I would say, "Hey, boss, sorry I didn't meet the deadline," and then you would react the way your boss would.
Interesting.
So it can also help you to change perspective and really to discover nuances, and then you will sit back down again and discuss, the role play. How made it feel? How did it make you feel now that you played the boss and you saw me come in a way like a subordinate or authoritarian, or how made that you feel now that you are the boss, and the other way around, and then you can switch roles again, and you can kind of improve that through role play. And so he was always a kind of an outside of the box thinker, and he used also medical cannabis before it became illegal in Switzerland.
Okay.
So the Swiss laws, Switzerland is always like 20 years behind the US. So I think in the US it was prohibited in 1930s. And in Switzerland, then the prohibition came in 1951 of cannabis. And before that, it was widely used. It was even part of the kind of a crop war, what we said during World War II. In Switzerland, we had a problem that not enough food was growing to support their own population. So everybody should plant potatoes or cannabis. So cannabis was part of this plan from the federal government to self-sustain the Swiss population. And a lot of that history that maybe we can get into that also in another episode was lost, and people don't even remember these areas. So, but he used it before the prohibition, and then from 1951 onwards, unfortunately, it was not possible. So, but that's also how I grew up, with just being open about alternative ways to tackle problems, and also that oftentimes you have to be careful. Just if mainstream blows into one direction, sometimes it's also good to look into the other one. Doesn't mean that you should be like a rebel through and through and like oppose everything, because also a lot of the mainstream thing can be right and true, but sometimes, and cannabis I think is a very extreme example, the way the perception of something can be totally wrong if you look at it from a more neutral perspective. And I think that's something that anybody who has dealt with cannabis from the industry, from a patient side, from doctors, really had to experience. And I'm sure we can talk about the history a little bit more in another episode. But I think it's important that when you deal with these issues, that, in my opinion, that you still stay within the evidence-based and the scientific kind of thinking, and really not try to provide miracles that often in plant medicine, you will see this advertisement, okay, take this pill and you will lose weight, or cannabis heals everything, which is not true. So it's not kind of plants are not here to do wonders, but still be open for the possibility and explore, and with the help of real world evidence also then to be able to say, okay, what are the areas that we can prove also that it really helps. And I think one of the goals is also that in plant medicine in general, cannabis, we know it for sure. It's also the flow of information is very important, because traditionally, when you go to the doctor and he prescribes you antibiotics, you take your prescription, you go to the pharmacy, he will hand you the standardized product, and you will consume it the way the doctor told you. In plant medicine, I think it's way more complex, because you have a grower, a cannabis grower, or another herb grower that can be very, very different. It can be outdoor. It can be in the Swiss mountains. We know Nikolai, for example. I think they employ the most herb growers in almost in the world. Yes.
Okay.
And there are different ways how to grow plants. It can be indoor, outdoor, glass house, whatever. And they play an important role, but they also need the information or to know, okay, what should I grow? Is it this genetic? Do people prefer outdoor, biological, or should it be very standardized indoor under very strict parameters? And then the grower cannot sell it to the consumer most of the time in plant medicine. So you need a pharmaceutical entity in between that then takes the raw material and kind of process it. The process can be drying, trimming, making extracts. There's so different ways how you can treat plants to end up then with the finished product. And the finished product, also the pharmaceutical companies, they don't sell to you directly. So you don't go drive to Basel, to Novartis to buy your medicine. You go to the pharmacy. So then again, you have the pharmacist, who also plays an important role, because he knows, he needs to know what's exactly inside the medication, how to store it. Maybe he also double checks also what the doctors ask the patient. So are there any interactions based on your other medications? And then in the end, you have the patient. So you have the grower, before the grower, even the geneticist, who like kind of keeps the mother plant and chooses genetics and makes the little plants that then are being grown in the facility. So you have many different stations, and the information nowadays, I think it's very cut. So
exactly,
the pharmacist doesn't know what the grower is growing. The grower doesn't know what he should grow, because he doesn't know what the doctor is prescribing, and the patient doesn't know the difference between different pharmacies or different growers. And I think our goal is also kind of to help the information flow within these systems, which I think is very important. Of course, it needs, as you mentioned, to be anonymized and not traceable to a single individual. But still, I think as a whole, the whole supply chain in the end can profit from the information being available to know what helps in which situations, that the pharmacist knows about the API, so what's exactly inside of it, that the patient knows what he wants, that the doctor knows what's available, so that the flow of information, I think, is something very, very crucial, and also why a lot of the industry globally is now still not to its full potential. And I think with the help of information, that hopefully can change in the future.
Yeah, I think it's critical. One of the images that we have in our mind around that problem is back in World War II or World War I with the biplanes. You had these pilots with their leather jackets, and they would go up and fight against each other. This is the Red Baron, and they would, loop behind each other and try to shoot at each other. And what the pilots needed in order to make those decisions of do I go up, down, left, right, was to know where the other person is and know the velocity and have all that information, because when they had that information, they could be much more effective in making the right decision. If you don't have that information, you get shot out of the sky. And one of the big innovations there was the white silk scarf. So we picture one of these pilots, leather jacket. If they just had the leather jacket and they were looking around like this, their necks would chafe against the leather, and so they would look less, and they would get less information. So with the silk scarf, they were able to move their heads without causing any kind of skin irritation and, slowing them down, and they became much more effective at what they were doing, and they got to shoot the other guy out of the air, and they got to survive and live. And so a lot of the ways that we're thinking about the data that we're providing here, the information is that as you said, the geneticist needs to know what to grow, and feedback from Vervana on what's effective for consumers. Am I doing really well in the UK, or am I doing really well in California for ADHD or for insomnia? And then what could I do differently to do better at that? And then passing that information all the way through the chain. So, here's a cultivator that if they lowered the temperature during the final stages, it would produce more of this particular effective terpene. Then in the logistics, which is kind of an overlooked part of the whole thing, if I ship a product and it's not stored between kind of room temperature, if it doesn't stay there, the terpenes can be affected by that temperature. Yeah. We've shipped some product before that went out of room temperature and got too hot, or the environment was too hot. We've shipped product before where it was sitting at the airport in transit, and this was in the UK, and it went below freezing. Yeah. And what happens to the trichomes, which are the little kind of clear mushroom-looking things that contain the THC and the terpenes, they freeze, they fall off, and the color changes, and it becomes a completely different flower. So what do? We wrap them in these thermal blankets that can maintain the product no matter where it is, within reason, but it's quite a wide range, at a room temperature. It's expensive. It's a lot of effort to get that, wrap the product and then ship it in that way. But it makes sure that the person's going to get it. Then the pharmacist needs to know the lab reports, what can be effective, because pharmacists are involved, or the retailer, if you're in a recreational market, the bud tender needs to be able to kind of guide you and share this experience. So what we're doing is making all of that available so that you can, drive your own experience and choose your own state change, and then having that feedback loop so that we get better and better at helping people to make that state change. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. So we're going to talk a little bit about Nikolai's clinical experience, share some stories of patients that he's been working with and what their goals have been and how effective plant medicine has been for them. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we want to get feedback from you, and we'd like it in the form of a voice note. So you can go on your phone and record a voice memo and send it to us, and you'll have the links here. so that we can listen to those and provide some feedback in each episode. So maybe you could share some recent experiences or about kind of patients who've come in and maybe are new or they've been trying things for a while and how you
maybe as a little bit background, like in Switzerland, medical cannabis only existed since August 1st, 2022. So now a little bit more than 2 years, soon 3 years. So it's kind of a new thing that patients have this possibility. It was legal from 2008 to 2022 also, but you need to have a special permit from the Federal Office of Public Health, which was very, very difficult to get and mainly reserved on very limited indications. Now, since August 1st, 2022, any doctor can prescribe medical cannabis medications also. So with the change, because of my background and my experience, I started to take on patients and even got referred patients from other doctors who say, hey, I'm happy to prescribe cannabis to my patient. He asked me for it, but I have no idea how to do it. Because the process is different in every country. In Switzerland, it's a special prescription that you need to fill, and you need to know which pharmacies have it available and what kinds. And in med school, you don't learn nothing about the endocannabinoid system. So I think
because it's too new, or because the pharmaceutical influence and shaping.
I think it's too new, and the med schools nowadays, I think, kind of are heavy influenced also by the industrialization of medicine. So the way medicine is being taught at school is very much like formed around our industrialization of medicine and the pharmaceutical industry. And because it was just the only way we could do medicine. So I think historically that's how it developed, but I think for example, plant medicine is never mentioned in med school, that we have plants that work and how they work. The endocannabinoid system is never being taught that. Maybe in other countries that's a little bit different. We know in China or also other countries, that's still a huge part of the education. In the Western world, I think it's totally forgotten and sometimes even being suppressed because many people profited of the prohibition of cannabis, be it not just the pharmaceutical industry. It traditionally was the paper industry and the textile industry that kind of initiated the whole prohibition process. And still until today, we see traces of that. So I think the patients that came first in August 2022 were like kind of these first movers, were people who already took cannabis, but not from the pharmacy, but really from the black market. And because there was no other way for them to get it. And the Federal Office of Public Health, they even researched that. They estimate that in Switzerland alone, we have over 200,000 patients, like not recreational, real patients that go into the black market, and that sometimes are people who are like 65 years old, have a chronic disease, and they go to a black market, to a dealer to buy the cannabis because they know it can help, but they're still playing with fire if they go to the black market because of all the quality issues. And so the first patients that come are really experienced ones, of course. They sometimes have consumed cannabis for more than 30 years already. They went through the 60s where before it became illegal, and they know a lot about cannabis. And all of them mention, first of all, the same. They say it changed. You know, before like 30, 20, even 10 years ago, cannabis that you bought from a head shop or from a dealer, it's not the same that you get today. And I think the reason is through the prohibition, cannabis got pushed more and more into the hands of criminal organizations in the end. So there was a time also in Switzerland, we know that, where farmers, they grew cannabis illegally. So they had maybe their crops, be it, for example, corn, and one section of the cornfield was cannabis, and they did that kind of in secrecy. They harvested, they put it into these small bags that then were being sold in head shops as like smelling essence or smelling bags. And everybody knew that you open the bag and you consume the flower. But it was kind of a semi-legal way how cannabis still managed to go into the stores. And it was okay, these patients report, because they say, at least the farmers or the people who grew that kind of knew how to grow a crop. And they know, okay, maybe you shouldn't go to your local hardware store to buy pesticides because you need to be careful what pesticides are possible to use on things that are being consumed later. And they know if you use fertilizers, how long do you have to wait from the last day you spray the fertilizer until you can harvest, so the residues of the fertilizers are being washed out, because they were kind of professionals. But these farmers got locked up, also in Switzerland, prosecuted. Also in many other countries, there are similar stories about the kind of war against cannabis. And this led to the point where it was only people who had a lot of criminal energy who were able to kind of grow cannabis. And oftentimes these were professional or semi-professional criminal organizations. And they, first of all, don't really understand how to grow something, often. So they don't have the same background as a farmer. And often they, frankly speaking, also don't care. So they only care about how many kilograms I can sell each month. And these led to really the pollution of cannabis. And the first studies, I think, from the Federal Office of Public Health was in 2014, where they looked at 151 different samples from the streets, and they said only one sample was considered safe for consumption. All the rest had either traces of heavy metals, of fertilizers, of pesticides, bacteria, and other things. So they said, hey, we have a group of 200,000 patients who go to the black market, and the stuff they're getting there is really bad for their health. So that's what kind of also initiated this change, that they said, hey, we need to legalize also the medical cannabis market. And the first patients, they were super happy. So they came and say, finally, I think medical cannabis has two big advantages. One advantage is that you can know that it's safe and that you know that it's clean, so that there's no pesticides, no fertilizers, no heavy metals. And with the legalization of CBD, which happened quite some time before, there was the additional problem that people could grow CBD legally. You can buy it at any kiosk here in Switzerland. But then these organizations would take the CBD flowers and spray them with synthetic chemicals. It can be HHC or CC9, and they are discovering new of these synthetic cannabinoids all the time. And then sell it as THC flowers, because they just spray it with some chemicals that make you feel high. What's important to know is that they're called synthetic cannabinoids, but oftentimes they're molecularly totally different than the natural cannabinoids.
Wow.
The way or why they're being called synthetic cannabinoids is just they also interact with your endocannabinoid system. They block the receptor, but they block it in a synthetic way that your body doesn't understand and cannot handle. So natural cannabinoids, your system, they are very similar to your own cannabinoids that you have in you. So the body knows how to break down THC and CBD, how to metabolize it, and then also how to get rid of it. Synthetic cannabinoids, they block the endocannabinoid system in a way that your body doesn't understand, and can be way more potent, and which sounds great for some people, but it means it's also way more dangerous. From natural cannabinoids, up until today, there's not really a way where you can overdose it and it affects your basic vital functions. Of course, if you overdose THC, it's not going to be pleasant. You're going to be high for a long time. Sometimes it can make you feel anxious or sometimes even paranoid if you really overdo it. But you will not stop breathing, or your heart will not stop. It will go away. It can take some time. It's not pleasant, but it's not kind of dangerous to your basic vital functions. With synthetic cannabinoids, there have been many deaths already. So if you consume that, and especially it's dangerous if you kind of think you're an experienced consumer or an experienced patient, and you know what you can handle, kind of have this attitude, but then you get a joint or cannabis with synthetic cannabinoids in a, let's say, 1,000 times the concentration that you would before. So you smoke one joint and it's the same as you would chain smoke 1,000 joints.
Wow.
You will not be able to handle it. And these synthetic cannabinoids, they actually also affect your vital functions. So you can have a kind of a cramps that you can deliver, your heart rate can increase. And in the worst case, they can cause epilepsy, and people died also from an overdose of synthetic cannabinoids. So that's, I think, patients who experience the bad quality on the black market, but are on the same time very dependent on cannabis as a medication, they were the first ones who went over and said, hey, okay, finally I have the possibility to know that I will get cannabis that is at least safe. And the second thing is then also what's the difference between the black market and the medical cannabis is that you know what you're going to buy. We discussed it's still a lot of room for improvement, so we still need to consider also minor cannabinoids and terpenes to show that to patients. But at least they know, okay, if I go and buy Gorilla Glue, hopefully it's going to be the same Gorilla Glue next time I buy it. And it's not just total guesswork that when you go to the dealer and he tells you, yeah, it's just wrong. And you don't know what else, you don't know if it's indica or sativa profile or... So I think these two reasons, the cleanness and knowing that what you're buying, then led to the first patients going through the medical stream. And the indications or the reasons why patients come and say, hey, I'm looking for medical cannabis as a solution is chronic pain. I think is globally speaking the way or the diagnosis or the symptom that most of the people have experienced positive results with cannabis. And secondly, it's the neurological disorders, so multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, ADHD is kind of in the middle. It's a neurological. We mentioned we don't know what exactly ADHD is, but a lot of people who have ADHD, also adult ADHD, do self-medicate on the black market.
Yep.
And then I think insomnia is also one of the large patient groups that treat themselves with cannabinoids. And for all these problems, there is also the mainstream medicine way. Of course, for pain, you can have ibuprofen, your Advil, for opioids, if you have stronger pain, you can have fentanyl, OxyContin. For sleep, there's being prescribed benzodiazepines or neuroleptics. For ADHD, you have Ritalin or Elvanse or Concerta or Adderall. And these things work, but oftentimes the patients that come, they say, I tried it, either it didn't work for me or the side effects for me were too great. And I tried cannabis and it worked better or the same way, and I had way less side effects. And that comes back to the explanation is also, if you have a single molecular drug, it just targets one receptor. If you have cannabinoids and terpenes, they are coming to you in a way broader spectrum. So you have many different receptors that interact with them, and it's kind of helping your own system that you already have kind of to optimize, to restore this homeostasis or the balance within you in a way that your body but also understands, because he was in contact with cannabinoids since he existed. I think 400 million years ago, the living things went into the direction of cannabinoids as a steering mechanism. So I think the patients that we see now in Switzerland, at least, are really the first movers. Most of them have experience with cannabis, realize that it helped with their symptoms, but also have negative experience with the black market. And I think in any country around the world, that's always kind of how it goes. So you go medical first, you see how you can get people off the black market that really are there for medical reasons. And then I think as a second step, often the recreational part of it comes in. So recreational, a lot of people don't like it from the industry, or say adult use, to say, hey, if we have legal alcohol, if we have legal tobacco that kill millions of people globally every year, why should we have cannabis illegal where that kills nobody? And to say, even if you know, if you overdo it, as with anything, there will be side effects. Everybody who had an overdose know that it's not pleasant. Of course, if you kind of smoke cannabis from morning when you wake up until you go back to sleep, and you go for the chemo bars that are very relaxing and sedating, it's not going to be good for your motivation. That we know, everybody knows someone who overdoses it.
Sure.
But if you do it responsibly, it can be totally safe. And so I think that's often the next logic step, that people realize, hey, okay, we shouldn't kind of censor adults from having the possibility to use it. And of course, the third step then, which is still in the future, I think, is to say, hey, now that we have the real world evidence, we know where cannabis helps, also we try to bring in the industrialized and pharmaceutical industry to say we can maybe even produce finished medications. And there are finished medications that use cannabinoids. Sativex, I think, was one of the first ones.
Yep.
Epidiolex is another one. One is more CBD based. One is a mix between CBD and THC. But these things, I think, still need some time to be further developed. There are some companies researching on it, but the traditional way to make a medication takes a long time. So 10 years on average, from discovery to finished product. So, but that's still in the future. Yeah.
Cool. We're going to take a brief break, and we'll be right back. In each episode, we're going to be taking your questions or comments for Dr. Berardi. And the way to do it is to record a voice memo on your phone or on your computer and send it to hi, at statechangepod.com. And we'll pull in your questions, play them back, and provide our feedback here.
And for people who don't know how to do a voice memo, is it also possible to just write an email?
You can also write an email if you'd like, and on any of our socials, feel free to post any kind of questions that you have, and we'll answer those in the coming episode. So next week's episode is going to be on innovations, so technology-based innovations in wellness. And any feedback that you have will be really appreciated. We want to make sure that that state change is useful for you. So everything that we're doing is about helping you to get access to the information that you need in order to make the change in your state that you desire. So one of the last things that I want to cover with you is we were talking a little bit about the negatives, and it seems that now, just recently in the last couple of months, there's a lot of talk about the side effects and the negative things that can happen. You've mentioned a kind of drop in motivation. There's the possibility of psychosis with certain people. And we certainly want to be very clear about the risks and how important it is when you're consuming cannabis that you're taking account of that you're starting with a low dose and you're going very slowly. And, where appropriate, you have a healthcare professional in the consultation. We know in some of the recreational markets, that's not the typical thing that happens. Clearly in the medical markets, the healthcare professional plays an integral role in helping you to maximize your health with plant medicine. So maybe you could talk a little bit about, what to watch out for and where it could be a problem, addiction, negative side effects to your physical health.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you share with patients to help them understand the risks?
I think we have to differentiate between side effects that we have from street cannabis or illegal cannabis or illicit cannabis and clean medical cannabis. In different markets, it can be different. Recreational sometimes is more regulated, sometimes less regulated, depending on the country you live in. And I think when it comes to risks and side effects, there is still a lot of unknowns also in the industry and the scientific world, because a lot of the studies that we have, they never really looked precisely on what did people consume. So we know there are studies who say cannabis causes schizophrenia. And this is a very popular example, because if you look on how the study is being done, is they just took a group of healthy people and a group of schizophrenic people, asked them, do you consume cannabis? And the group of the schizophrenic people said, yes, more often.
Oh, wow.
So first of all, we have to be careful about correlation and causation. And that's a topic that we will meet over and over and over again in the scientific world, that also in like newspapers, especially kind of these boulevard newspapers, often get mixed up. Just because something correlates doesn't mean that it causes it. Yes, schizophrenic people have more cannabis consumption. If cannabis really causes schizophrenia, is still highly disputed within the scientific industry community, because if you look at schizophrenic people, they will also have a higher rate of drug abuse. They will have a higher rate of alcohol abuse. They will have a higher rate of not sleeping enough, for example. So there's many factors who could cause or trigger these schizophrenic episodes, and cannabis could be just one of them. We know if we have a healthy population and we give 50% of the healthy individuals cannabis and 50% not cannabis, that the risk of developing schizophrenia is almost the same in both groups.
Interesting.
So it seems that the schizophrenic population doesn't really, the schizophrenia is not caused by cannabis, but it seems that schizophrenic people tend towards the use of cannabis. And oftentimes in these psychotic disorders, you have a lack of impulse control and you have a lack of control over your life in general. And then there's, of course, if you use cannabis, the risk that you overuse it. And we know also something that's very important to understand, that around not so long, let's say 30 years ago, the average THC content in a flower was around between 5 and 10%. Nowadays, it's almost reaching 30%, 25 to 30%. And we have strains that have even more than 30% THC. And the THC in cannabis is the main component that is kind of psychoactive and psychotrope. And these high THC strains are often just used as a marketing tool, be it in the black market, in the recreational market. And unfortunately, sometimes also patients who are medical patients say, just give me the strongest THC strain. And oftentimes that's not the right solution. So, because if that would be the case, the more THC, the better. The solution would be quite simple. You can isolate THC, go the industrial way. There's a substance called dronabinol, which is kind of pure THC, and that would be the holy grail, and everybody could use 100% THC drops, and that would be it. But people who tried both flowers or full spectrum extracts or flowers and the pure THC, all of them say the pure THC is not the same effect as this full spectrum. So THC is not the holy grail, and we know that the more THC that you have, the higher is also the risk that you will develop unpleasant symptoms. So high THC can cause, or what the THC kind of does, it makes you hypersensitive. And this hypersensitivity can be good if you are somebody who kind of tries to reflect about something. It helps a lot of people also to manage certain things and to remember it. But if you overdo it, it can cause anxiety. And it can make you think in a spiral and don't get out of it. depending on then what terpenes also are in it, if they're very sedating or muscle relaxing, that can also be unpleasant. The people say, I feel like I cannot move anymore. So I think the dose is very, very important, that you don't overdo it. And people say, yeah, well, how do I know? If you are naive to cannabis, so you never tried it before, first of all, don't trust what your smoking buddies tell you and say, I consume 500 milligram edibles, no problem. That's probably not going to be your way to do it. So I always recommend, if you do it, start on a very low dose and then go slowly and increase your dose over time. And slowly meaning not eat a 5 milligram THC gummy, wait 10 minutes, and after 10 minutes say, I don't feel anything, eat another one. It means day by day. So start day 1 with 5 milligrams, later on day 2 or day 3. If you say it doesn't do anything for me, then you can go to 6 or 10 milligrams. So really go slow on the daily intake. And of course, also, as with any substance that kind of changes the state you're in mentally, there is a certain risk of dependency. So for some people, cannabis really becomes like the center of their life. And they say, I get up in the morning, I smoke a joint before I do anything else. I will smoke 10 more during the day, and before I go to sleep, I'll have another one. And in my opinion, I think that's as soon as it becomes a habit that you do, and you cannot really explain why you're doing it, you're just doing it because that's you, then whatever that is, that habit, be it smoking a cigarette, be it drinking alcohol, be it working, be it taking a Xanax, whenever it becomes a habit that you do it just so you have done it, and you cannot really explain why you do it or what happens if you don't do it and you just do it, then it becomes problematic. And I think then you really need to consider also reducing the amounts that you consume. And the good thing about cannabis is from a bodily perspective, it doesn't make you addictive like heroin, for example, or crystal meth, or some of the harder drugs do. So you can easily, even if you're an experienced consumer, and I recommend that even to my patients, from time to time, take a break. It can be 3 days minimum. Give your body time to kind of flush out all the residues that you have. And we know that the breakdown products of THC stay in your system quite long because they're like fat soluble, so they will be stored in your body fat. Give your body time to flush it. 3 days, maybe sometimes even 3 weeks. That's kind of the goal, minimum 3 days. A lot of people say after 3 weeks it's even better. After 3 months, normally it's non-detectable anymore that you have consumed cannabis. So give your body time to relax also. And if it doesn't work again for you, instead of increasing the dose, also think about using a different strain. Because sometimes people think, I tried this strain, I tried this genetic as an extract, as a inhalation method. It didn't do for me, so maybe double the dose will do. And instead of doing that, try with different strains in the beginning if you're not experienced. As a comparison, if you take an Advil or an ibuprofen, if it doesn't work, you also don't say, okay, let me take 2, next time let me take 3, let me take 4, let me take 5. That's not the way to do. If ibuprofen or Advil doesn't work, just try another substance. And the same with cannabis. If this chemobar doesn't work for you, try with another one. And thirdly, is also if you kind of feel that the consumption that you have is becoming problematic for you, I think it's also to look for professional help. And I know it's difficult to talk about these topics, but there are many experienced professionals who can support you. I think it's also important that you try to listen to the peers around you. So if everybody around you starts to mention, hey, that you're consuming too much, maybe you should also listen to them. And try then just to go and look for professional help.
Well, thank you very much, Nico. I really enjoyed making this first episode with you. And I'm looking forward to the future conversations.
Same to you. And also questions, not only for me, but also, of course, regarding to AI, because I think it's a huge buzzword. A lot of people talk about AI. A lot of what's labeled AI isn't really AI. And we'll delve into these topics even deeper in the future podcast. But also, if you have questions around that, what is AI? What is not AI? How can we start to use it? Also, questions for you, I think could be very interesting. So we are not just for the patients and recreational consumers of cannabis, but also for the nerds who really are interested in how can technology help to advance medicine in general. I think that's where we want to go in the future. And looking forward for the next episode, and also for all of your questions. Feel free to reach out, and we'll have all the links and the addresses also edited in. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.